Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Football Giants. I am John Schmelk. Today we are joined by Cody Alexander. He is the creator of MatchQuarters.com, also head of football ops over at Field Vision. We're going to have a Vikings preview for the second part of this episode. Cody, you got John Schmelk here in East Rutherford, New Jersey, and Cody does a lot of work on the defensive side of the ball. We've talked a lot about what Brian Dale might do with the offense this year. Cody, this is a great job to look at what Shane Bowen brings over from Tennessee and how he might use his scheme with the Giants personnel.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I really enjoy watching Bowen's defense in particular. When it was not surprising that he was picked up really quick by the Giants after Vrabel was let go with the Titans.
All right, so why don't we start real simple first? Before we start diving into the details, why do you enjoy Shane Bowen's defense? Why do you think it's effective?
Well, I think they do a lot of things that modern defenses are kind of doing right now. So he's pretty much on trend with what we're seeing across the NFL level. I really like his nickel usage, the way that he is able, the nickel defender in particular, the way that he uses it. He had a really, really good slot defender in Roger McCreary with the Titans, and he kind of used him as a weapon. That's really how I see Drew Phillips fitting in with the Giants. So you guys have a really good nickel, and I see him kind of using Phillips in the same way he used McCreary.
Yeah, and you talk about him using the nickel because technically the Giants' base defense is a 3-4 set. But watching his defense in Tennessee, there was just it was mostly even man fronts with the ends really, really wide, and they were in nickel most of the time. Do you expect that's what we're going to see a lot here with the Giants as well?
Yeah, if you actually go the 3 years that he was a defensive coordinator with the Titans, they were not high in nickel usage in terms of what other teams in the NFL are doing it. So they didn't just live in it. But when they did run base, they were running it pretty much 50-50, 4-3 or 3-4, just depending on what the other team was doing. And so going back to like why I like him, he is willing to be very multiple in his attack. They were also one of the top dime defenses. So they were using kind of a 4-1 box with three defenders. This is where I think like a guy like Tyler Nubin, who can come in and be that kind of dime, quote unquote, backer with Phillips at the nickel. Both of the guys that you drafted showed in the preseason they're really good near the box. And so it kind of factors in when you look at what he did with the Titans and kind of projecting forward what he might do with the Giants.
When he runs that dime, are you looking at three safeties on the field there, or you're looking at more five corners?
Yeah,
four corners, pardon me.
Well, I really think you don't want to leave a guy like Nubin on the sideline. I think if you look at the corner situation with the Giants, it probably is better to have the three safeties on the field than it is to have than it is to bring in like a fourth corner.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you. Bowen's defense traditionally has been very strong against the run. And I think what makes it more impressive for me is that a lot of his pre-snap alignment stuff is the, two safety shell deep type of things. And the fact that he has been able to stop the run despite, leaning into early down quarters, things like that, to me, it tells me there's something really well that his guys do fundamentally up front. So from your perspective, why do you think Bowen's defense, despite the fact, again, he wants to try to have those two safeties deep when he can, has been so effective against the run?
I think he knows how to utilize the middle of the defense. I mean, when he was with the Titans, he didn't necessarily have the linebackers that the Giants have, but he had two really good inside guys. So I see a guy like Dexter Lawrence being used in a way of really mitigating a lot of the space in the middle of the box, keeping those linebackers clean, and then able to run to the ball. And that's where I think he's a little bit different from some of these other guys that base in nickel. They don't really care about the run defense as much, whereas he really wants to have kind of a really good base in the run defense. So you stop the run, you have some fun on third down.
Absolutely. I'm curious. Actually, one thing we've debated here is how they're going to use Dexter Lawrence a little bit, right? Because watching in Tennessee, they didn't utilize a traditional nose tackle as much, right? It wasn't a guy necessarily lined up over the center, but that's where Dexter Lawrence has really found his groove and been a dominant player over the last couple of years. Do you feel like Bowen will lean into that a little bit more, given the personnel at his disposal here?
Yeah, I do think that it is a trend overall in the NFL of even if we are going to be a four down nickel base, we're going to find ways to get into five-man fronts, whether that's walking down Okereke or walking down McFadden, just as like a quasi edge. You're really just blitzing the C gap with the linebacker, but getting into that odd spacing so that now he's shifted over, maybe a shade on a center or over top the center. I do also think being able to have a guy that's dominant like that, putting him in a 2-eye or on the inside shade of the guard, you're forcing double teams
Yep.
every single play, which again, you're changing the math up front. That's where I think he's really good, is changing the math up front with that four down front. And really why we saw this offseason, inside linemen are, especially on the defense, are getting paid. And this is why, because you're changing the math up front.
No question. And you just put a video up on matchquarters.com, and one of the features of it was how he tries to attack the edge of the defense, right? And if, again, Dexter's drawing two guys inside, he's drawing the guard to whatever side he's lined up on the center, and the center, that's going to allow him to attack that edge a little bit more. So talk about some of the real basic ways that you saw in the preseason. I think it was the Lions game that you looked at, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Shane Bowen tried to attack the edge of what's a very, very good Lions offensive line.
Yeah, and I always like, I tell people all the time in the preseason, you're seeing pretty much what the established base is. So we're not getting a lot of kind of, these classic pre-snap looks. So you're really getting an idea of like how he wants to go about building a base defense. And
Day
I
one,
like
day two installation type stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I like the Lions offense just because they do a lot of gap scheme with a lot of 12 personnel. So you're seeing they do a lot of pre-snap movement as well, even in their base offense. So you're seeing a lot of what a lot of these modern offenses are doing. So what he did, you have the classic edge pressure from the nickel where he's coming off the edge, you're rotating to cover three. But what he has really proven that he is really good at is attacking these B gaps, which the modern spread offense and really these modern offenses, that's kind of where the leverage piece is for these modern offenses, where they want to attack, and being able to use kind of these different mixes. Like I said in the video, he used the overhangs, which is your nickel, your down safety, and then your linebacker, which happens in any kind of 3-by-1. And the NFL is a big 3-by-1 league. And so being able to manipulate protection, and part of that piece is going to be Dexter Lawrence, and maybe setting him in a 3 technique to get the protection to slide his way, attack those B gaps, having those. Now you've got two really good edges in Burns and Thibodeau, where the tackles are going to have to lock on him. So it creates this natural alley in the B gap. And he really illustrated that against the Lions.
And leading into what you're talking about here with those two edge players now, I feel like they're going to get some really good opportunities given some of the wide alignments they're going to have, especially on third downs. Is he going to be able to scheme up, especially if Dexter's drawing two inside, a lot of pure one-on-ones for Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau off the edge?
Yeah, because that's what it goes back to, that math problem is, yeah, they have 5 offensive linemen, but if you're going to take 2 to go to Lawrence, or you're going to slide to Lawrence, you're essentially playing a 4-man slide, and then I'm locking one of those edges. And so they can then dictate off of that where they want the slide to go just by placement alone. You can put both of the inside guys in 3s. You could take one of the defensive ends and move them inside to kind of put them on the guard and then really unleash that. So he has a lot of ability to then play around with those protection schemes. And really, that's what it is in the NFL. It's about attacking protection and not necessarily the blitz schemes.
Now, the Giants are going from one of the 2 heaviest blitz schemes in the league last year. I think Martindale, Brian Flores, the Giants' opponent in week 1, ironically enough, was the other that blitzed a ton. But talking to the players this offseason, they tell me, yeah, it's not as aggressive as last year, but it's not a passive system. This is a system where you are, even though, again, you're trying to get home with 4, maybe you're not blitzing as much, you're trying to dictate to the offense a little bit. So how, despite the fact maybe he's not bringing blitzes so frequently, is Shane Bowen trying to dictate some things to the offense?
Yeah, so I call them passive pressures, because you are not necessarily like Martindale, 7 guys on the line of scrimmage. You don't know where people are going to come from. We've got our 5-man, 6-man pressures. We're playing a lot of zero coverage, a lot of man. We're putting a lot of stress on the offense. The kind of the inverse of that, though, is you're also putting stress on a really young secondary, which the Giants were last year. So playing a lot of man with rookie corners is not necessarily a recipe for success. So what Bowen does is, in his 3 years at Tennessee, they actually led the NFL in simulated pressures. So simulated pressures are just, it looks like we're going to blitz 5 or more, but we only blitz 4. And a lot of times, going back with like the Dexter Lawrence, using him as a leverage tool to get the protection you want or to get the run that you want, and then attacking those natural alleys. Like, for instance, the Lions run a lot of gap scheme. A really good way of attacking gap schemes, which is just counter power, is we want to attack the B gaps. The B gaps are right where the pull is coming from, so you're either punching the puller or you're chasing the puller. And you don't necessarily have to have 5-man, 6-man pressures off of that. The other piece of this is that what you're seeing up front doesn't necessarily have to match in the back. So just because we're sending something doesn't mean we have to spin into a fire zone, which is a cover 3 shell. We don't have to run cover 3 behind this. So he does a really good job of not only mixing up the blitz patterns and how they're doing that, but also the coverage piece on the back, which is where that passive pressure comes from. Of, we're not going to, face melter defense where we're sending 7 guys and then we're playing cover 0 and cover 1 behind, but we're really making the quarterback work and the protection scheme work as well.
All right, I want to get into the coverage packages here in a second. First, I want to ask about Bobby Okereke, because he's going to be the Giants' green dot. He's a great speed, run and chase guy. He's not a guy I think you want, taking on some of those gap scheme plays, the offensive line pulling into the hole. He can do it, but that's not really where you want him. You want him chasing the ball and being kept clean. Talking to Bobby, he said we probably aren't going to be doing quite as much two-gapping as we did last year under Wink Martindale. It's more of a kind of get-upfield, penetrate type of thing. Are they going to be able to keep Okereke clean so they can get the most of his skill set at Mike linebacker?
Yeah, and I really think it comes down to the inside play. Like, Lawrence is going to have to dictate double teams, and if he can do that, which we all are pretty much in agreement that he's going to be able to do that. If he can do that and still be able to kind of survive, then you're going to be able to keep that second level clean, and that's really where that comes from. We're seeing a trend too. There's really kind of 2 ways of looking at it. We have the Fangio system guys and the Fangio adjacent guys that want to use these 5-man fronts to create one-on-one blocking up front, and then it's just kind of, we're going to win somewhere. We don't really care about the linebacker. We're going to keep him clean just through numbers. Then you have kind of this, it's the Shanahan kind of conversion of the Carroll system, where Saleh, we have the Jets, obviously, in that 49ers. The Browns are probably in this as well, where we want wide 9s with our defensive ends. So they're going to get, you mentioned it multiple times, we want them wide, we want them rushing up the field, but then the inside guys really have to be gap sound. They have to be able to hold their leverage. And what that does is it creates these large windows for the linebackers who can then run through on any kind of downhill attack, but then also they don't necessarily have to sit and react, where it's kind of more two-gapping, where two-gapping is really patient. So you kind of sit, right, go, right? Or sit, drop. Whereas this is more or less, hey, open window, close it. Oh, this is hi-hat. Okay, I'm dropping back. And so it creates that, it's just a different philosophy, but but Bowen really has leaned into kind of the wide 9, control the inside with your interior defensive lineman.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Are we getting to the point now where a guy like Dexter Lawrence might even have more value to a defense than an elite edge player? I mean, you've probably mentioned him 7 different times in 6 different questions and how he allows you to unlock so many different things. Is that where we're heading now, where the Dexter Lawrences, the Chris Joneses, those guys might end up being more valuable to an NFL defense than maybe even your elite edge?
Yeah. So the thing about the NFL that is so foreign to college and even the high school level is that they really don't necessarily care about a 5-yard run, right? Like, if you get a 5-yard run off, and this sounds insane.
Oh, you're right though.
Right. Because, if you're sitting here on a Friday or a Saturday and they're gashing you with 5-yard runs, like, you're pulling your hair out. You're like, we got to get a new DC. But in the NFL, a 2nd and 5, a 2nd and 6, like even a 2nd and 4, that's a passing down. down. So where a guy like Lawrence really comes in is if we can stop and we can keep them from running the ball on first down, or we can keep them behind the chains. A 2nd and 7 is now we can get into a little bit of our pressure package, or we can our manipulation. We can now really scheme for that. So it opens the playbook for you. It also, again, it goes back to changing the math. I think the philosophy for GMs now are to draft edges and draft corners every draft, and just at some point you're going to hit, you just kind of cycle through them. But interior defensive linemen, those human beings are not around. Like, elite interior guys just don't exist at a high level. So when you get one, you just pay them because they change so much. They don't get a lot of the credit as the edges because it's not sexy. They don't get, 15, 20 sacks that some of these like top level guys get, but their presence is really changing the way that teams, especially offenses, are having to play the game.
Yeah, Dex Lawrence had 4.5 sacks last year. He was just as impactful as any edge rusher that had 15. And I think it's just weird for people to wrap their heads around that. Frankly, you look at the last 2 draft classes too. I mean, 1 or 2 defensive tackles, really, wow. and just it has been you're right. They just have not been as common as guys coming off the edge. All right, let's talk about some of the coverage stuff now. I've mentioned this a couple times already, and please correct me if my interpretation is wrong, that he kind of wants to have that 2 safety shell at the snap, and then he's going to try to rotate after that to try to confuse a little bit the post-snap read from the quarterback, right?
Yeah, and that's really kind of been a trend in the NFL this year. Really, the past couple of years is using more from a 2 high shell. I'm a DB guy. That's kind of how I got my start. It's so much easier playing down than it is to play back. And then even when you're running a cover 3, the NFL offenses are very attuned to how to beat cover 3. It's the main coverage in the NFL. It pretty much always has been that in cover 1. And so for them, how do you attack cover 3? You do it with these deep crossing routes. Right. And it's easy for the quarterback. It's right in front of them. Well, as a defense, if I have a guy near the box, it's harder for me to gain depth, especially with so much play action and so much motion now on early downs. But if I play him from depth, by the time he's worked down to about 8 yards, he can clearly identify whether he's getting a crossing route, it's play action, anything like that within that pre-snap read. Now, like I go back, you give a little bit up in the run game per se, but when you have a dominant interior guy, you've kind of mitigated that risk. And I think that's where where you kind of want to pull that. Also, play action from under center. The quarterback's turning his back on the defense. The moment he turns around, it can look completely different. Now he has to recalibrate. So elite quarterbacks, obviously, it's probably not as big of a deal, but some of these average to below average quarterbacks, they have to completely recalibrate. Well, by the time that you hold the ball for a second longer, that's when the sacks occur. That's when the hits on the quarterback occur. That's when the mistakes occur. So that's where that comes from.
What is that secondary zone man defense split going to look like? How much is he leaning the quarters, cover 2, man, cover 3? What is that menu going to look like? Or is it really going to vary a lot each week based on the opponent?
It will vary, but he has really shown he really wants to. They've actually led the NFL out behind. Actually, they're behind the Jets the last 3 years with the Titans in quarters. I think you're going to see what he really wants is to have about 25% quarters, 25% cover 3, 25% cover 1. And then that other 25 can be red zone coverages, miscellaneous coverages. And then he does sprinkle in cover 2 just because I think everybody in the NFL has to have some sort of Tampa. Tampa's really good when you're playing a lot. When you play a lot of man on 3rd and short, 3rd and medium, it's a nice little adjustment right there. So that to me, typically it's like a 30-30-30 split is what we see for the most part. But if you look at what he has, it's more, it wavers, but it's around that 25 mark for all those 3 coverages.
Now, you've mentioned some of the Giant personnel on defense, and I'm with you. I think Drew Phillips, his physicality, especially in the slot, I think is going to be really important against the run. He's feisty. Tyler Nubin, again, we've seen his ability in Minnesota. He can play that post if you need him to. He can play half a field. He can support against the run. He can blitz. He can do all those things. But this is a very young secondary. We went through this earlier in the week on one of our shows. Their top corner, Tay Banks, is in his 2nd year. Cordell Flott, their extensive starting second corner, is in his 3rd year. Jason Pinnock's just in his 4th year, and he's changed positions, so he's probably not even truly a 4th-year player. Dane Belton, one of their 3 safeties, is in his 2nd year. Then you have, of course, Tyler Nubin, a rookie. So How does this defense, you think, going to be able to work with a young secondary where, you talk about zones, passing guys off, post snap movement, communicating? How is that going to work with such a young group? And how quickly do you think Bowen's going to be able to get these guys all on the same page?
Yeah, and I do think that that's going to be part of the growing pains early, but I don't think that this is going to necessarily be a super complex defense in terms of the way that it's already set up. Like it's pretty much the term for it's like modular defense, where the front has we run a certain front, the coverage behind it is kind of in there as well, but we run different pressure packages with different coverages. And so to me, I think like being multiple looks a little scary, but the way that now a lot of these modern, especially the really good coaches are teaching it, is it's kind of like interchangeable parts. Is that, hey, this technique is similar to this, or we're using like as systems to teach it. And so when you want to be multiple like that, a lot of times, a lot of people see that it's like, oh, well, you're not really a master of anything. Like you're just kind of, we do a bunch of stuff, but we don't hang our hat on it. The Browns are over there running nothing but cover one. Like at least they're good, and so I think what happens, for a defense like that when you're young is you will go through a couple of growing pains, but for the most part, I think that the base is already established, and really you're taking the pressure off of this young secondary by not playing man all the time. I think man typically tends to be the easy button for a lot of people, but you forget that when you are young, you still haven't kind of adjusted to the speed of the NFL. And so now, when do you ever get a breather? Right? When can quarters is really easy. I just got to stack my receiver. I just can't let them deep. I play top down. I'll have underneath coverage. Like cover two, I'm really just reading the slot. If he comes out, I snap down on top of it. I know I have safety help over the top. Like there's different things that you can do. And especially from playing from depth, like he wants to play, that also takes a lot of stress off of it too. So I think that it's kind of that we're giving the confidence back to the secondary. We may have a couple of busts, but for the most part, we're giving that confidence back to these young guys.
With the way he runs his zone, how much of their quarters and zone stuff turns into a match principle deal where it kind of turns into man-to-man a little bit? Or is this more of a kind of spot drop and player area type of situation?
The easiest way to tell this is where the nickel's located. So like if in cover three, for instance, if the nickel's typically outside of the receiver, then we're playing some sort of match principles. We're trying to funnel it to the post safety. If he's inside out, like now we're normally working spot drop. So what you'll see is probably on base downs, it's going to be more match heavy. When behind pressures, it's going to be more probably spot drop. And that's just that little mix right there. A lot of times in the NFL, if you want to get real match heavy with it, like you really want to lean into that, you're just going to play cover one anyway, because that's essentially what it ends up. And at the end of the day, if you go four verts, it's typically going to turn into a match at some point. So it's kind of depends on what you get, but for the most part, blitz is going to be zone, and then kind of base downs will probably be a little bit more of a match principle to it.
Oh, so really, you see thing in his blitzes, a lot of people think blitz you're in man. You think a lot of when he blitzes, he's going to be more of a kind of keep everything in front of you kind of spot zone type of deal.
Yeah, especially if it's not actually man coverage behind it. So if you're seeing zone behind it, and a lot of times what you don't want, for instance, I don't want Brian Burns trying to carry the vertical hook from the first level. Like I don't want him to get in a situation where he's got to run with a slot defender. So a lot of times what you do is you just put a safety on top of that. So that's where these quarter pressures have become really popular, is because we're seeing these guys get burned out in these seam routes, and it's not really their fault. I mean, Thibodeau and Burns are great athletes, but you match them up against somebody that's running and burning through the slot. The average third receiver in the NFL is still going to be faster than most defensive ends who have to start, move, and then go with it. So that to me is where the spot drop mentality comes, especially on these second and third downs that are long, and we want to send some pressure because we want eyes on the quarterback. We want to attack the ball in the air.
All right, let's lock in real quick before we say goodbye, Cody. And this has been fantastic. Great conversation. You're going to play a Vikings team on Sunday, which comes from the McVay school with Kevin O'Connell, a new quarterback in Sam Darnold, who I think has a chance to have a pretty good year playing in that system. We saw what Nick Mullins did then the last year, very productive games. Yeah. How do you think Shane Bowen's scheme is going to adjust to what Kevin O'Connell tries to do and what that Vikings offense is going to try and do?
Yeah, I think it's set up to be pretty even. I think you're going to see a lot of quarters. I think you're going to see a lot of cover two, just to be have hard edges on both sides. I think what we talked about, having that edge pressure, is going to be really important, especially with the wide zone. And this crew has been dabbling and getting back into more power schemes. So again, we're right there with the pressures that we have right there. The thing that you're going to have to do is they are going to feed Justin Jefferson regardless, and really I think where Jefferson has set himself apart from pretty much everybody other than Tyreek Hill is just that it doesn't matter zone man. So what you have to be able to do is just survive the shots to Jefferson. Just understand that he's going to probably get 100 yards, but we can't allow him to have touchdowns. And I think that's what's going to be the key is we can't allow these explosive plays, which is really essentially what Bowen is trying to do with the scheme that he has. 4 down, let them to the clock. If they want to run the ball a little bit, we're okay. Eventually, they're going to get a 2-yard run or a 3-yard run, or we're going to tackle them for loss. Play some quarters behind it, play cover two when we need to kind of keep that shell defense. And then just on early downs, be really smart about where we implement our cover three and doing it from depth so that we're cutting off those crossing routes.
I mean, that's really the base principle of a good defense is now, right? Don't let a team gorge you in the run. If they get, average 3.5, 4, even 4 yards per carry, you're fine. But it's really all about limiting explosive plays now, right? And I feel like leading into quarters a lot, that's pretty much what Bowen's trying to do here. Have Dexter Lawrence lead a lighter front to do well enough against the run, but do not let guys beat you with explosive plays.
Yeah, and really the way the modern game is now is like you run to win the game. But you're not going to win running the ball. I think that's kind of where we've got, and that's where, we kind of had that, running backs don't matter. What was it, like 5 years ago? People were like, oh, analytics, running backs don't matter. We need to pass every down. Like, people are like, oh, it's going to turn seven. No. Football is always going to be a physical game. Running the ball is always going to be important, especially as we know, like play action matters, like things early down. And being able to establish just some sort of physicality throughout the game, being able to control the clock when you are ahead and when you do need to win the game. But in terms of just like winning the game, you have to be able to throw the ball. And when you dampen those explosive plays, especially these offenses that are used to these explosive plays, and you keep a damper on that, it frustrates them. And especially with a quarterback that's pretty much average to below average, you're forcing him to win the game, which is what you want, instead of being able to control the clock.
All right, final question, just getting back to Justin Jefferson, as you mentioned him. We saw when the Giants played the Vikings at the end of the 2022 season in the playoffs with Wink Martindale, they were putting a safety over the top. They were putting a linebacker to take away those deep in cuts. They had 3 guys in that zone sometimes to not let Justin Jefferson beat him. How does Bowen generally like to work against top wide receivers? Does he like to go over the top with the safety? Does he like to do bracket? How does he try to take away other teams' top wide receivers? Or does he just kind of stick to his principles and run what he runs?
Yeah, I think there's also a trend now. I call it targeted coverage. So we're used to like the old school quarter, half. But now people have been playing around with where do you run the cover two side? Because you're basically getting a zone double on top of that. You have a corner that can be physical and trail. You're funneling him to a safety. If you have a good nickel that can handle the number 2 receiver, you can then carry that vertical hook so you can really do it. I think we're going to get a lot of zone doubles. I think if you play a lot of man, a lot of times too, like people are like, oh, well, just play man and then shade a safety over top of them. And that doesn't necessarily work when you play basically a motion offense like we have with the Vikings that use a lot of pre-snap motion. There's a lot of moving parts, guys going in all different directions. That doesn't necessarily work in that sense. So that's where I think these zone doubles, having some sort of way to play cover 2 over top of Jefferson at all times. And then also, when you do run your quarters, make sure that he's catching it underneath of us, tackle him, live to play another day.
All right. Final question, because you just mentioned motion. When you see teams do their pre-snap motion, are we going to see the Giants do a lot of shifting with their linebackers and ends to accommodate that? So you're on the, weak, strong and all that stuff. And second part of the question, when you have the shifts and motions at the snap, are we going to see a lot of, communication, trading guys off, or are we going to see guys following and trailing in some of those motion situations?
Yeah, so this is actually why quarters has become so popular in the NFL, and even just cover two just a little bit, just because you're an even defense. And so you have you basically have two safeties on each half, you have two corners outside. Any kind of motion can be dealt with. Even if we run cover three, I'm still doing it from the table. We can still get our rotations. We don't have a lot of moving parts. If we get a tight end shift, we are literally doing is going from a 2-eye to a 3. So you're going from inside shade to an outside shade of the guard. Very limited movement. Our ends aren't moving. Our backers are in 30s. Basically, they're on the outside shade or stacking the guard. So what ends up happening in this is you've kind of made it hard for the offense to really use motion as a leverage tool. And so that keeps you pretty much safe in that sense.
Cody, this has been fantastic. Tell the folks where they can find other great knowledge on defense and everything else you're doing.
Yeah, so if you're interested in defense, matchquarters.com is the place to go. I've got links to pretty much everything. I've got everything from clinics, books, to articles, long form articles that you can read, and then obviously I'm on social media with links on that. So head over to Match Quarters and make sure you're subscribed.
Cody, fantastic. The week one of the regular season is finally here. It feels like it's taken forever to get here, yes. And now we're in a 4-month sprint, which is always the best time of year. Thanks so much for the time, man, and enjoy the season.
Yeah, appreciate it. You too.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
All right, now we turn our attention to the Giants' opponent. And don't forget, Giants Huddle is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day to celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans can get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. And now we join by Matthew Collar. He joined us earlier in the year to talk a little about his book on PFF. He also covers the Vikings. Matthew, before we get started, tell the folks where they can find your great coverage of the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, purpleinsider.com is everything you need. You know, we all try to be on all the platforms. I was thinking about, I don't know if other people are fans of The Office, but remember the woof and how it sends you an email and a fax and all those things at once? I feel like that's what I do now. It's just like, you can find me here, and here. But purpleinsider.com is probably the best place for everything.
Do you also have the Collar thoughts at blogspot.com like Creed? No?
You know, I probably did at one point have a blog spot where I was trying to, you know, practice writing articles or something when I was in college.
Yeah, I don't think that exists anymore. All right. We're just so the fans know, we're recording this on Thursday morning, so that's kind of where the information is the most. It's going to get posted on Thursday. Latest on Jordan Addison. He's the one guy I think that everyone's kind of keeping an eye on in terms of the Vikings injury report.
Yeah, absolutely. He was limited in practice yesterday, just from the 15 minutes that we get to see of practice. Looked like he was moving around okay. And then when we talked to Kevin O'Connell, he was positive about his chances. He talked about getting him ramped up a little bit more as the week goes along. So I would expect that he might be limited to some extent again for the next 2 practices, but it sounds like everything is trending for him toward playing, which is a really good thing for the Vikings because they don't have a safety net with the wide receiver room like they did when KJ Osborne was here. He signed with the Patriots in the offseason, and that's not a household name, but he was a guy who could get 50 to 60 catches, 500, 600 yards in a season. And if he had to be bumped up to wide receiver 2, he could absolutely do it. Now, if you go past the number 2 wide receiver, you have Trent Sherfield, who's bounced around the league, Jalen Naylor, who is also banged up with an ankle injury, and we'll see if he's going to play. Tristan Jackson, who was a really good camp story, but has, I think, 2 NFL receptions. So they need Jordan Addison to be healthy for this game.
Yeah, and obviously no TJ Hawkinson either, who's still dealing with the recovery from his really bad injury at the end of last year. So when we spoke back in, I guess, it was probably June, right? We both thought that Sam Darnold would start the year as the starter, and now he kind of has to because J.J. McCarthy is out. So what has the Sam Darnold experience been like throughout camp, watching him with the first team? And do you think there is a full trust there with Kevin O'Connell where he's just handing him the offense and he's going to run this thing as though he had Kirk Cousins like he did last year?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot different than it was with Kirk Cousins, where if you go back and look at the game logs with Kirk Cousins, and you saw this in the 2022 2 games that the Vikings and Giants played, they threw the football a lot. It was a pass first and then pass some more and then pass a little bit more with Kirk Cousins. I was looking at his game logs and found that 16 out of Kirk Cousins' 25 games with Kevin O'Connell, he threw 35 passes or more. So he really leaned into the Kirk. I don't know if that's what you want to do with Sam Darnold. Now, during practice throughout the summer, I can see why people keep giving Sam Darnold chances to be an NFL starter.
He's talented, right?
He is extremely, extremely talented. The arm talent down the field, looking for explosive plays, is exceptional. He had some really wowing practices, especially when throwing to Justin Jefferson. But then you also saw when we had joint practices with the Cleveland Browns, where there's some reasons why he has bounced around the league. One of the things I think with the middle of the field, reading the field is difficult for him at times. When people get around his feet, he gets a little bit antsy, as a lot of quarterbacks do, but I think he gets more antsy or struggles to keep his eyes downfield and kind of just whips the ball into traffic sometimes. And that results in interceptions, pass breakups. And so I think that Kevin O'Connell has had a huge sample size to understand the strengths and weaknesses of Sam Darnold and to be able to curate his offense rather than just trying to say, all right, just play Kirk Cousins, because they're so different. Kirk Cousins doesn't have the big arm, but yet was very accurate, was extremely good at hanging in the pocket and delivering accurate passes over the middle. Anticipation throws were great for Kirk Cousins, whereas I think Darnold just wants to let her rip. And I also think now they have a much better running game to play off of, which will be very important with Aaron Jones. So you're going to see a different offense than the last time the Vikings faced the Giants. But also, when you look around at what Sam Darnold's going to have, assuming that Addison will play, and a better offensive line than he's ever had, better receiver, certainly in Justin Jefferson, than he's ever had, better number 2 receiver. When Hawkinson comes back, better tight end eventually. You can get talked into, hey, when you look at those Carolina and Jets teams he played for, it was nowhere close to this. And you could see him playing a lot more competently than he ever has before. So I think he had a very good camp. It was better than even I expected. But now, of course, got to go do it in the regular season to prove that. But I can see why people keep running Sam Darnold back out there.
I feel odd. I'm not going to ask you a question about Justin Jefferson because I don't know what else we can say other than he's just freaking awesome. I rewatched a lot of his tape earlier in the week, and he's unbelievable. You can throw something in there on JJ that maybe we don't know if you want. But you mentioned the run game there, which I think is interesting. The Vikings had one of the least efficient run games in the league last year. They couldn't really do anything. They bring in Aaron Jones, who, when healthy, is a really good back. Is there a confidence level that the running game will be better? And what is that run game going to look like? Is a lot of zone stuff? Are they leaning into some of that gap stuff that some of the other McVay disciples are? What do you think this run game is going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Jones is a massive upgrade from what they had in Alexander Madison. Madison was a guy who was a quality number 2 that they tried to push into a role that was a little over his head. Aaron Jones is a straight up baller. I mean, you look at all time yards per carry. Aaron Jones is way up there on the list. He averages the same yards per carry as Barry Sanders for his career, 5.0 yards per carry. That's crazy. And not surprising to me, of course, because he throttled the Vikings every time they played against him when he would come to US Bank Stadium or at Lambeau Field. But what you see from him is a guy who is the older running back. It's always a concern. Now, maybe Tiki Barber would say you could be a 30-year-old running back and be pretty good.
Right.
But there's always the concern that somebody's going to fall off at that age. I think what they have with Aaron Jones, though, is a guy who doesn't necessarily live on pure burst. This isn't if you remember Chris Johnson for back in the day, ran that 4.2, but as soon as he didn't run a 4.2, he wasn't the same. This is more of a Mack truck at times who can plow over people. He's also extremely crafty. And I think he sees the field extremely well. He sees blocks develop before they're going to happen. And then he catches the ball really well out of the backfield. So he kind of sees the matrix as a running back rather than just running by people. And I think that can help with his longevity. The other thing is, too, that as soon as the Vikings signed him, they had a plan formulated for him throughout training camp in the offseason to make sure that by week 1, he was 100% healthy. And so far as I could tell, he is, that he took some practices off, as veterans should. He's got a routine before, he's got a routine after to try to stretch as much as he can and work on some of the previous areas that he's had injuries before. And they're doing everything they can to get the best version of Aaron Jones. And if they do, then after being one of the worst running teams in the league the last 2 years, they could be one of the better running teams in the league because their backup also has a lot of talent, Ty Chandler. And I think those guys are going to mix and match. And then to add to that, they really struggled at left guard last year to run block. Ezra Cleveland at first was their left guard, and then Dalton Reisner, who people know, but he's more of a pass protector. They've replaced him with a 6'7" guy who weighs about 320, big giant Jumbo Elliott looking dude, looking to road grade. I think they want to do more of that gap stuff. They call it kind of the mid zone. They like to run between the guard and the tackle, but you can do almost anything with Aaron Jones. And I think they've put a lot of thought into what is our run scheme really going to be, because it was very scatter shot, throw stuff at the wall last year. So I think they've made some internal changes for even just how they design that run game. And then just to even go even farther on this, because this has been a deep Purple Insider investigates over the summer. How will they run the ball better? I think they're going to play two tight ends a lot more, Johnny Munt and Josh Oliver. Oliver's one of the better run blocking tight ends in the league. I could see a lot of big personnel in this game from the Vikings.
Interesting. All right, let's jump into the defensive side. Do you feel confident the defensive personnel has been improved upon from last year? Because it was rough at times last year. And how do you think that's going to impact Brian Flores' approach in terms of how he runs his defense?
Yeah, I think what Giants fans are going to see is an incredibly different defense than the last time they played the Vikings. I mean, night and day. The personnel is completely different. The scheme is wildly different. I don't think Daniel Jones can use that game to prep, although maybe to hype himself up because he played so well against the Vikings in those two games. But they have really become a much deeper defense with the additions that they made this offseason. Because last year, Brian Flores was inheriting what was left over for him from Ed Donatel. But now he's been able to bring in the guys that he wanted for this defense. And so the outside linebackers are more his style, the quicker, the undersized guys, as opposed to, hey, Danielle Hunter, you have to do all the pass rushing. Now they've got Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, 2 day one free agent signings. Dallas Turner, it will be very interesting to see how they mix him in. He took a lot of first team reps in the summer, which I think is a good sign for him. And his quickness is really something different. You don't get drafted in the first round for no reason, but there is an element of athleticism there with Dallas Turner that goes above and beyond for that role. So how do they mix him in? They've improved a little bit on the defensive line, and the cornerbacks, even though it's one of their weaker groups, last year it was maybe the worst cornerback group in the entire league. And they bring in Stephon Gilmore, who I think will be a big upgrade from what they've had before, Shaq Griffin as well. And then they have a strong linebacker group. They have a strong safety group. So I think that this defense, as far as just talent across the board, and they are completely healthy on this unit. I mean, we're looking at a team that could be in the top 10. The schedule is not easy, but as far as it pertains to this game, it is. It's going to be a wildly improved defense than the last time they faced the Giants.
And we expect Brian Flores, crazy blitz packages, showing 8, dropping 6, dropping 8, and just depending on how, from play to play, he's going to show a lot of different looks.
Yeah, the last time you and I talked, we talked about how teams scheme using a lot of the data and stuff. And I'm sure the data was wild to look at for teams behind the scenes last year. Like, what is he doing? I think it will be less madness this year because the reason, I don't know if you've ever read Doug Farrar's book, The Genius of Desperation.
I did. It's a great book.
Yeah, great book. And there was a lot of genius of desperation in the Vikings defense last year. I don't think that Brian Flores wants to blitz that much or wants to drop 8 that much. It was just the best thing he could do when he only had really one pass rusher. And now that he has numerous options here, Blake Cashman can also rush as well. They signed him as a free agent. Ivan Pace is a good rusher. So is Josh Metellus. So they can bring it from a lot of different places. I think last year they were just, who can we blitz? How can we do something here? I think they want to rush 4 more often. I also think they want to play man coverage more often. Stephon Gilmore was, I believe, the 10th highest graded man coverage corner last year. And he's always been really good at that. Last year, they had to play a lot of zone just because they didn't have guys who could play effective man coverage. Now they went and got a couple of corners who can do that. And I think that will bring it back to normal-ish. It's never going to be normal with Brian Flores. We know that, but normal-ish will be this defense, I think, more than just blitz or drop everyone.
All right, final question. You don't have to give me a score if you don't want to. If you want to, great. How do you think this game is going to go? What do you think it's going to look like? I think we could be in line for a bit of a high-scoring affair on Sunday, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think most people would probably say the defenses are going to be ahead of the offenses here, considering Dexter Lawrence, where everyone here is expecting Dexter Lawrence to wreck the game as he did in the playoffs. And the addition of Brian Burns also, that battle with him and Christian Darrisaw is going to be phenomenal to watch. Those two go at it. I lean a little bit more toward that. I think the Vikings want to run the ball more and look for an explosive here or there off play action. And if they can win the game 21-17, I think they would be pretty happy with that rather than maybe some of the shootout style games they played with Kirk Cousins. So I tend to lean toward the defenses are going to be a little ahead here. But the thing about week one is I think it's always week one advantage offense, because defenses don't know the new wrinkles that are going to be thrown in. I'm sure Brian Daboll's got his little package of plays that he's never used before that he wants to throw out there. I guarantee that. I have a lot of respect for him as a head coach. So, but I think that these are two teams that both also are coming into this season knowing that nobody really thinks either one of them is going to be great. But when you look at their roster, there's more talent than maybe they're giving credit for. I think that goes for both teams. So maybe a little edge here between both, a little motivation to win this one.
Well, I'll tell you what, Matt, I learned something today that maybe the Vikings are going to lead into a little bit of a different offensive style here, and you're not going to have that kind of, free-flowing offensive attack. Appreciate the time, my friend. Enjoy the game on Sunday, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, great to catch up with you, John. We'll talk soon. Appreciate it, man.
That's the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. Citizens will donate $750 to the Giants Foundation for each scoring drive during the 2024 season. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. Thank you to our guest today. I am John Schmelk. We'll see you next time on the Giants Huddle podcast.